Welcome to Counterculture with Danielle D'Souza-Gill. The culture's gone crazy, media's gone mad, and reason has become repugnant. Here we focus on facts and how to fight back. Tonight we'll be discussing how the medical community is using its power to indoctrinate children about gender. We'll speak with Dr. Miriam Grossman, who is also the author of a new book called Trans Nation. At the turn of the last century, America was experiencing a major backlash against mass European immigration. In particular, people were alarmed about the number of Irish and German Catholics coming into our borders. With the exception of the former Catholic colony of Maryland, Catholicism was generally viewed with equal parts disgust and suspicion. Followers of this strain of anti-Catholic prejudice originally operated in secret, and thus came to call themselves the Know-Nothings. The Know-Nothings eventually went above ground as a political party under that exact name. The Know-Nothing Party made the argument that Catholics could not be trusted to be truly loyal American citizens because their faith was the only religion with its own nation-state, the Vatican and Rome. How could you expect Catholics to have America's best interests at heart when Catholics themselves viewed the Pope and Vatican City as having greater authority than our government? In 1882, a Catholic priest named Father Michael McGivney decided to respond to this growing animus by forming a group of Catholics to counteract the propaganda and stereotypes being used to turn Catholics into second-class citizens. One of his more brilliant acts of marketing genius was to name the group after the Catholic man who had originally discovered the continent, and thus the Knights of Columbus were born. According to their own charter, the primary focus of the Knights of Columbus was to teach patriotism for America and demonstrate that devout Catholicism and patriotism were complementary values. The group came to be known for their displays of love for country. What Father McGivney did with the Knights of Columbus was to take the criticism of America's Catholics seriously. He didn't engage in ad hominem attacks, calling the Know-Nothings racist or bigots. Instead, he respectfully engaged with them in order to win hearts and minds. This attitude of mutual respect towards someone who despises you became a hallmark of peaceful civil rights movements in the following century. Activists realized that you can win over more people with honey than vinegar, as the expression goes. Martin Luther King Jr. used this tactic in his protests. He exhorted fellow protesters to attend boycotts and marches in their Sunday best because it played better in the media. But when he engaged with the largely working-class black community to push voter registration, he wore denim work clothes. He was aware of the differences here and the damage caused by stereotypes and adjusted his tactics accordingly, even when those stereotypes were held by the blacks themselves. That's the story of two successful civil rights movements in America. Most people spend so much time denigrating the thinking of Know-Nothings and Jim Crow Democrats these days that few pay attention to the fact that Father McGivney and Reverend Martin Luther King soberly addressed their criticisms. But it's an important fact to remember. Civil rights movements are at their most effective when they eschew the tactics of force. Tactics like mockery and police state coercion gain compliance, but not converts. And they knew that this was not the best tactic. But how important is this lesson? Are there examples of civil rights movements that don't follow this example? Well, let's take a look at a gay pride march that occurred in New York in late June. That particular march garnered a lot of attention because at one point the protesters chanted, quote, "We are coming for your children." Now, it's no secret that since the 1990s, proponents of gay rights and gay marriage thought of themselves as the successor movement of King's own civil rights movement from the 60s. They operated under the assumption that objections to homosexuality were just a different form of bigotry and the same prejudice that once targeted blacks and other minorities, for example. This assumption formed the bedrock of their political ideology. This was the argument that many made, and this gave their movement a sense of inevitability that many thought culminated with the legalization of gay marriage by the Supreme Court. You may recall that one of the more common refrains at the time was an insistence that homosexuality is an innate trait, that you are born this way and there's nothing you can do to change it. That was an important idea to push because it put being gay on par with being black, for example. Both are the result of natural biological processes out of the control of the individual, so the argument went. Persecuting someone for being gay, therefore, was the same as persecuting someone for being born black, for example. Now that the trans movement has attached itself to the gay rights movement, it's telling that this concept of being born gay has disappeared from the national discourse. The whole point of the trans movement is that choice is everything. You can be gender fluid. You can choose if you want to change your gender. Your volition determines your gender. Your mind can transform your biological reality. You can be pansexual. Despite being completely untrue and insane, this magical reasoning has managed to become an article of faith for many in America in our current year. Transgenderism has completely taken over. But the fact that's untrue means that societal resistance is also strong. People are pointing out that you can't choose to become a person of a different gender no more than you can choose to become an airplane or an animal. And there are actually children in schools now who believe that they are truly cats. Others are pointing to certain disturbing characteristics that are prevalent among the trans community, despite the fact that they comprise such a small demographic, and I'm talking about adults here. We've talked about these in our show before. There's a high rate of violence, suicide, self-loathing, and self-mutilation. But there's also a disturbingly high number of pedophiles among the trans community. Recently, a trans orgy was interrupted by a medical emergency. When the authorities arrived, they discovered a back room of 4 small children. There's a more than coincidental connection between drag queens and events that seek to sexualize children, like Drag Queen Story Hour, that are oriented for the specific purpose of happening with children. New Hampshire's first openly transgender state representative was also recently arrested on child pornography charges. This is very disturbing. The association between transgenderism and child abuse is so great. Members of the gay community formed the group Gays Against Groomers in an attempt to formally divorce themselves from this stigma, and I completely understand why. The connection is real. The criticism is warranted. Drag Queen Story Hour is not safe for children. And yet, when drag queens get together to protest for their rights, they openly mock this concern by claiming to be, well, coming for your children. That's what they say. We can call this what it is, a taunt. The people involved in that march aren't taking the advice of leaders like Father McGivney or Reverend King. In fact, the drag queens are deliberately doing the exact opposite. They want to fight. In the words of the original organizer of the New York Drag March, this is a common tactic of the movement. He said, quote, "It's all just words. It's all presented to fulfill the worst stereotypes of us," end quote. In other words, them using this to taunt us is confirmed. And here we get to some interesting developments that validate the wisdom of the civil rights leaders of America's past. According to a survey from the Public Religion Research Institute from 2021 to 2023, there's been an across-the-board increase in support for traditional views regarding the so-called gender binary and things like pronouns. The number of Americans who believe that there are only 2 genders has gone from a majority of 59% to an even stronger majority of 65%. Common sense is sinking in. In the final analysis, we have to ask ourselves if this failure to adopt the approach of the more successful historical civil rights movements is the result of a tactical failure on the part of their leadership, or is it simply the byproduct of an ideology that disdains humanity as much as it does reality and doesn't actually want peace?